Recently, the story started making the rounds that Tom Holland actually filmed a cameo for last year's Venom, but that Marvel made Sony cut it from the finished movie. Could this be true? In this editorial, I will explore the origin of this claim, whether or not it may be true, and if so, why Sony would want a Tom Holland cameo, and why Marvel would block it. A number of outlets have run with this story, but the only source behind the original story is the August 21st episode of the Colider Podcast.
So, I understand where people saying Disney is greedy, but Disney is saying, hey, we're going to co-finance this. Babe, let's 50-50 split this because it's benefiting both of us in the long run. And actually, it's benefiting Sony too because people saw Venom because there was rumors Tom Holland was in it. And I'll tell you the truth, Tom Holland did film a scene for Venom. I found this out. Marvel saw the movie and saw that it was like, take him out. Take the scene out. So Tom Holland did. Peter Parker was in Venom, not Spider-Man. Peter Parker.
What's making you say that?
I got sources on behind that.
I can tell you that John Schnepp told me the same thing.
Yep.
A while he even said it so on air at one point that he knew someone that Holland had shot something and it was gonna be in the movie, and then when it didn't happen, I was like, oh, I guess that never happened. But then it just looked like they saw it, wanted it out. But
they pulled it.
But the other
Disney pulled it.
Yeah, Disney pulled it.
I have not been able to independently verify this claim. As such, this should technically be considered as a rumor. As far as rumors go though, this one sounds exceedingly plausible. You even had Amy Pascal alluding to that something may be on the cards as far back as when they were promoting Spider-Man Homecoming.
Well, those movies will all take place in the world that we are now creating for Peter Parker. I mean, there'll be adjuncts to it. They may be different locations, but it will still all be in the same world, and they will be connected to each other as well.
So there is a chance that Tom Holland as Spider-Man will pop up somewhere over there? There's always a chance.
There's always a chance.
So yeah, I'm inclined to believe that this is indeed on the money, and that Sony did film a Tom Holland cameo which Marvel subsequently made them cut from the movie. Before we move on to why Marvel would demand Sony do such a thing, let's look into why Sony would go to the trouble of filming such a cameo to begin with, seeing as Spider-Man had already been written out of Venom's origin story. In the clip we just saw, Amy Pascal went out of her way to try to convince the audience that there was a connection between Venom and the other upcoming Venomverse movies and the MCU, using terms like they take place in the same world but are adjuncts to it and what have you not. Although she stopped short of saying they were actually in the MCU, which they are not. But that is nonetheless what Sony wants the audience to think, and Amy Pascal perfectly explained why.
I think one of the things that Kevin has done with Marvel that's was so brilliant, and is by bringing the fans along and making each movie seem like a chapter in a book that you have to read that chapter in order to go forward. And I think the investment that the fans get to feel in being part of a larger story and understanding what's happening, I think is something that I know Sony would want to emulate.
Pascal has a way with words, but to paraphrase, what she's saying is that Marvel found a way to make audiences see every movie Marvel releases out of sheer commitment, even the movies many otherwise might have skipped. And that's something Sony would want to emulate. And why wouldn't they? Any studio wants the kind of franchise everyone will flock to see every installment of, just because it's part of that franchise. The biggest franchise in the world, of course, is the MCU, which neither Venom nor any other upcoming Venomverse movie like Morbius the Living Vampire is part of. But Sony's thinking is that if the audience can be, shall we say, convinced into thinking that they are, well, then audiences will flock to see those movies as well, so as not to miss any references or new characters or storylines that might be followed up on in later Avengers movies. To be clear though, for all the posturing and displays of the Marvel logo in the promotional campaign, neither Venom nor any other upcoming Venomverse movie could actually contain anything like that. because they aren't part of the MCU, even though all of the Venomverse characters are derivative of the Spider-Man license. They couldn't even have Spider-Man. Not for as long as the Marvel ride-sharing deal with Sony was in place. So what to do? Sony would have wanted nothing more than to put Spider-Man into Venom, even if for a brief cameo, but they were legally prevented from doing so. The same is true for Peter Parker, who was also locked up within the MCU alongside Spider-Man. But what about a cameo of Tom Holland, portraying a character who looks like Peter Parker, but who isn't identified either on screen or in the credits as Peter Parker? That's a loophole. Marvel might not object, but fans would still recognize Tom Holland as Peter Parker and buy into a non-existent MCU connection. I can only imagine that must have been what Sony were plotting, having Tom Holland cameo as some random guy audiences would recognize as Peter Parker. A brilliant plan, which I have no doubt Sony executed. But executing something and getting away with it are two different things. According to the contracts between the companies, Sony can make whichever movie they want of whichever character they want under the Spider-Man license, without Marvel having any real influence over proceedings. Sony has to abide by certain stipulations though, and Marvel must be given access to scripts and work prints if they ask for it, although they cannot demand any changes be made, unless Sony has violated the stipulations of the agreement. Sony are the ones with full creative power. As I said though, there are some stipulations. One of them was that neither Peter Parker nor Spider-Man could appear in a Sony movie not co-produced by Marvel for as long as the ride-sharing agreement was in play. If Sony did indeed put Tom Holland as implied Peter Parker into the movie, that would be challenging the intention of the original agreement. Sony probably gambled on Marvel seeing through the fingers, but no such luck. If this indeed is accurate, Marvel blocked it, and from their point of view, with good reason. There can only be one Marvel. It is not the first time that Sony wanted in on that sweet MCU action. Even while exploring the feasibility of the ride-sharing deal in the first place. Half a decade ago, Sony wanted The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to retroactively be made part of the MCU. So Sony's planned Sinister Six and The Amazing Spider-Man 3 could be made largely as Sony had intended, but released as MCU movies and Marvel co-productions. Kevin Feige flatly rejected that, because he didn't need someone else he couldn't control playing in the MCU sandbox. If Sony had gotten their way, the MCU would have had some movies that not only tonally and narratively stuck out like sore thumbs, it would have had some movies rated rotten on Rotten Tomatoes as well. For the same reason, Marvel doesn't want to legitimize any association between the Venomverse and the MCU. So they put the foot down and asked Sony to delete the cameo. Sony probably could have challenged that, meaning the matter would have gone to arbitration, but that they probably wouldn't have won. So Sony took the easy course of action and deleted the cameo. That at least is what I think happened. Do you agree, or maybe you disagree? Either way, let me know in the comments, and be sure to check back soon for my thoughts on what Sony can do with Spider-Man now that they've reclaimed the license to the movie rights.